The sound of 6 children crying in the night was something Zachary Quinlan never thought he would face alone. But there he stood in his Wyoming homestead in 1876, rocking a screaming infant while trying to comfort 5 other sobbing souls who did not understand why their mother would never wake up again. The fever had taken Sarah so quickly that even now, 3 weeks after burying her on the hillside overlooking their ranch, Zachary still expected to see her in the kitchen when he came in from the fields, expected to hear her humming while she worked, expected to feel her hand on his shoulder when the weight of the world pressed too hard against his chest. But she was gone, and he was left with Thomas, who was 12, Margaret, who was 10, Daniel, who was 8, Catherine, who was 6, little Samuel, who was 4, and baby Emma, who was only 8 months old and cried for the breast that would never feed her again. He had tried. God knew he had tried to keep everything together. But a man could not milk cows and mend fences and break horses and cook meals and wash clothes and tend to scraped knees and nightmares and a baby who needed constant care. The older children helped as much as they could, but Margaret was just a girl herself, and Thomas was doing the work of a grown man already. Zachary could see the exhaustion in their young faces, could feel his own body giving out after too many nights with too little sleep. Something had to change, but he did not know what. That was when he heard about the widow in Eureka, California. A traveling merchant passing through mentioned her in casual conversation at the general store, spoke of a woman who had lost her husband to a mining accident 6 months prior and was struggling to keep her little dress shop open. She had no children, the merchant said, and folks worried about her because she seemed to be fading away with grief, growing thinner and quieter with each passing week. The merchant did not mean anything by the comment, was just making conversation, but something in Zachary's chest tightened at the words. A woman alone, a man alone, 6 children who needed a mother. It seemed almost providential, though he felt guilty for even thinking such thoughts when Sarah's grave was still fresh. But guilt would not feed his children or keep them clothed or teach his daughters what they needed to know. Guilt would not rock Emma to sleep at 3 in the morning or help Catherine with her letters or make sure the house did not fall into complete chaos. So Zachary made a decision that felt both practical and terrifying. He would travel to Eureka and meet this widow, and if she seemed like a decent woman, he would propose a marriage of convenience. It would not be love, not like what he had shared with Sarah, but it would be survival for both of them. The journey from Wyoming to California took 3 long weeks with 6 children in tow. They traveled by train as far as they could, then took a stagecoach, and finally hired a wagon for the last leg of the journey. The children were surprisingly good considering the circumstances, though Emma cried constantly, and Samuel had nightmares every night. Zachary found himself explaining over and over where they were going and why, found himself promising that everything would be all right even though he had no idea if that was true. Thomas stayed quiet most of the time, his young face set in hard lines that made him look far older than his 12 years. Margaret tried to mother the younger ones, but Zachary could see the grief still raw in her eyes every time she looked at baby Emma. Eureka was a mining town nestled in the mountains of Northern California, smaller than Zachary had expected but bustling with activity. Gold had been discovered in the area back in 1851, and though the boom had faded, there were still enough miners and merchants and families to keep the town alive. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, some painted and well-maintained, others weathered and leaning slightly. Zachary found a boarding house that would take them for a few nights, got the children settled, and then asked the proprietor where he might find the widow who ran a dress shop. "You mean Wilhelmina Rosewood?" the woman said, her eyes sharp with curiosity. Her shop is 3 buildings down on the left, but I should warn you, she does not take kindly to strangers bothering her, keeps to herself mostly. Zachary thanked her and made his way down the dusty street, his heart pounding harder than it had any right to. What was he doing? He did not know this woman. She did not know him. How could he possibly ask her to uproot her entire life and take on 6 children who were not her own? But he had come all this way, and his children needed stability. So he pushed open the door to the dress shop and stepped inside. The shop was small but tidy, with bolts of fabric stacked neatly on shelves and several finished dresses hanging on display. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes and light brown hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her dress hung loose on her frame, suggesting she had lost weight recently, but her eyes were what caught Zachary's attention. They were a deep blue-gray, and they held a profound sadness that he recognized immediately because he saw the same thing every time he looked in a mirror. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. "Are you Wilhelmina Rosewood?" Zachary asked, pulling off his hat. "I am. Are you looking for something for your wife?" "No, madam, I do not have a wife. That is, I did, but she passed 3 months ago. Fever took her." The words came out rougher than he intended, and he saw the woman's expression shift slightly, some of the wariness replaced by understanding. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Thank you. I heard about your husband as well. Mining accident, someone said." Wilhelmina nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Yes, a tunnel collapse. They never even recovered his body." An awkward silence fell between them. Zachary knew he should just say what he came to say, but the words felt impossible. How did you ask a stranger to marry you? How did you explain that it was not about love but about survival? "Madam, I know this is going to sound strange," he began, "but I came here specifically to meet you. I have 6 children back at the boarding house. The youngest is just 8 months old. I have been trying to manage on my own since my wife died, but I cannot do it. The children need a mother, and I heard that you might need help keeping your shop running. I thought perhaps we could help each other." Wilhelmina stared at him, her blue-gray eyes wide. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I am asking if you would consider a marriage of convenience. I am not talking about love or romance. I am talking about 2 people who have lost their partners helping each other survive. You would have help with your shop and a family to care for. My children would have a mother. I would have help raising them. It is practical, if nothing else." "Practical," Wilhelmina repeated, and something that might have been a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You want me to marry you for practical reasons." "I know how it sounds," Zachary said quickly. "But I am desperate, madam. My oldest boy is 12 and already working himself to exhaustion. My 10-year-old daughter is trying to mother 5 younger siblings. They need stability. They need a woman's touch. And I heard that you were struggling too." "Struggling," Wilhelmina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I suppose that is one way to put it. I can barely get out of bed most mornings. I have lost 3 customers in the past month because I could not finish their orders on time. The rent on this shop is due in 2 weeks, and I do not have enough money to pay it. So yes, I am struggling." She looked down at her hands, and Zachary saw them trembling slightly. When she looked back up, there were tears in her eyes. "But I loved my husband. I loved James with everything I had. The thought of marrying someone else, even for practical reasons, feels like betrayal." "I understand," Zachary said, and he meant it. "I loved my wife too. Sarah was everything to me, but she is gone, and I still have 6 children who need to eat and have clothes and be cared for. I am not asking you to replace her. I am not even asking you to love me. I am just asking you to help me raise my children and let me help you keep your shop." Wilhelmina was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "What is your name, Zachary Quinlan?" "I have a ranch in Wyoming. Cattle and horses mostly." "And you traveled all the way from Wyoming to California to meet me?" "Yes, madam." "That is either very brave or very foolish." "Probably a bit of both," Zachary admitted. Another silence fell, but this one felt less awkward. Wilhelmina seemed to be turning his words over in her mind, weighing the impossible decision before her. Finally, she spoke. "I need time to think about this. It is not a small thing you are asking." "I understand. We will be at the boarding house for a few days at least." "You can find me there whenever you are ready to give me your answer." Wilhelmina nodded, and Zachary turned to leave. But as he reached the door, she called out to him. "Mr. Quinlan, would you bring your children by tomorrow? I would like to meet them before I make any decisions." "Of course," Zachary said, feeling a small flicker of hope in his chest. The next afternoon, Zachary brought all 6 children to the dress shop. They were scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes, though even their best was worn and patched. Thomas walked with his shoulders squared, trying to look grown up and responsible. Margaret held baby Emma and kept the younger children close. Daniel and Catherine stuck together, their eyes wide as they took in the shop. Little Samuel held Zachary's hand and kept sucking his thumb, something he had started doing since his mother died. Wilhelmina was waiting for them, and Zachary saw her eyes widen slightly when she took in the reality of 6 children all at once. But she composed herself quickly and came around the counter to greet them properly. "You must be Thomas," she said to the oldest boy. "Your father tells me you have been working very hard to help with the ranch." Thomas nodded stiffly, his jaw tight. "Someone has to." The words held an edge of resentment that made Zachary wince, but Wilhelmina did not seem offended. Instead, she looked at the boy with understanding. "You are right. Someone does have to, but you are only 12. You should not have to carry such a burden alone." Something in Thomas's expression cracked slightly, and Zachary saw his son's eyes glisten with tears he was fighting to hold back. Wilhelmina moved on to Margaret, who was watching her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "And you must be Margaret. I see you are taking good care of your baby sister." "Someone has to," Margaret echoed her brother, but her voice held less anger and more exhaustion. "You are doing a wonderful job," Wilhelmina said gently, "but would you like some help? Taking care of a baby is tiring work." Margaret's lower lip trembled. "I am not her mother. I do not know if I am doing it right." "May I hold her?" Wilhelmina asked. Margaret hesitated, then carefully transferred Emma into Wilhelmina's arms. The baby immediately started to fuss, her little face scrunching up. Wilhelmina rocked her gently, making soft, soothing sounds, and after a moment Emma settled slightly, though she still whimpered. Wilhelmina looked down at the infant with an expression that Zachary could not quite read. Sadness, certainly, but also something else. Longing, perhaps. "She is beautiful," Wilhelmina said softly. "They all are." She spent the next hour getting to know each child. Daniel told her about the horses on the ranch and how he wanted to be a wrangler when he grew up. Catherine showed her a picture she had drawn of their family, including a scribbled figure that she said was their mother in heaven. Samuel mostly clung to Zachary's leg, but eventually warmed up enough to show Wilhelmina his favorite toy, a small wooden horse that Sarah had given him for his last birthday. Through it all, Wilhelmina listened and asked questions and treated each child like they mattered. Zachary found himself watching her closely, seeing past the grief-worn exterior to the woman beneath. She was kind and patient, and despite her obvious exhaustion, she seemed to come alive a little bit when she was talking to the children. When it was time to leave, Wilhelmina handed Emma back to Margaret and walked them to the door. "Thank you for bringing them by," she said to Zachary. "They are wonderful children." "So you will think about it?" Zachary asked. "I will think about it," Wilhelmina confirmed. 2 days later, Wilhelmina appeared at the boarding house just after breakfast. Zachary had sent the children outside to play under Thomas's supervision, so it was just the two of them in the small parlor when she arrived. She looked like she had not slept much, but there was a determination in her eyes that had not been there before. "I have made my decision," she said without preamble. "I will marry you." Relief flooded through Zachary so powerfully that he had to sit down. "Thank you. You will not regret this, I promise." "I hope not," Wilhelmina said, taking a seat across from him. "But we need to establish some rules. This is a practical arrangement, as you said. I will help you raise your children and you will help me with my shop. But I am not ready to be a wife in all senses of the word. I need time to grieve my husband properly." "I understand. I am not asking for more than you can give." "Good. And the children need to understand that I am not trying to replace their mother. I cannot replace her and I will not try. But I can care for them and help raise them. I will make sure they understand that." "Then we have an agreement," Wilhelmina said, holding out her hand. Zachary shook it, her hand small and cool in his larger, calloused one. "We have an agreement." They were married 3 days later by the local minister in a simple ceremony with no guests, except the 6 children. Wilhelmina wore a plain blue dress, and Zachary wore his best suit. The vows felt strange in his mouth, promising to love and honor a woman he barely knew. But he meant the words about support and care, and when he looked at Wilhelmina, he could see she felt the same. They were not in love, but they were two people trying to survive, and that was enough for now. The practical matters came next. Wilhelmina closed her dress shop temporarily and packed up the inventory and equipment. Zachary arranged for everything to be shipped to Wyoming along with her few personal belongings. She had so little, he realized. Just some clothes and a few pieces of furniture, and a small collection of things that had belonged to her late husband. A pocket watch, a shaving kit, a photograph in a tarnished frame. She packed these things carefully, handling them like precious treasures, and Zachary understood. He still had Sarah's things tucked away in a trunk at home. Her hairbrush, her favorite book, the quilt she had been working on when she got sick. He could not bring himself to get rid of them. The journey back to Wyoming was long but less chaotic than the journey to California had been. Wilhelmina proved to be good with the children, especially baby Emma, who took to her immediately. Margaret seemed relieved to have some of the burden lifted, though she watched Wilhelmina carefully, as if waiting for her to fail or leave. Thomas remained distant and resentful, barely speaking to Wilhelmina even when she asked him direct questions. The younger children were easier. Daniel chattered endlessly about the ranch and what Wilhelmina would see when they got home. Catherine asked if Wilhelmina would teach her to sew. Samuel started following her around like a small shadow, and one night when he had a nightmare, he reached for her instead of Zachary. Wilhelmina held him and rocked him and sang a soft lullaby that made Zachary's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. When they finally arrived at the ranch in late summer, Wilhelmina stood in the yard and looked around at the wide Wyoming landscape with an unreadable expression. The ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a main house, a barn, a chicken coop, and several fenced pastures. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in August. The grass was golden and the sky was impossibly blue, and the wind carried the scent of sage and earth. "It is very different from California," Wilhelmina said quietly. "Is that a problem?" Zachary asked, suddenly worried. "No, just different, more open, more wild." She turned to look at him. "Where is your wife buried?" The question caught him off guard. "Up on the hill behind the house. There is a spot under a cottonwood tree where she liked to sit and watch the sunset." "Will you show me?" Zachary nodded and led her up the hill, leaving the children under Thomas's supervision. The grave was marked with a simple wooden cross that Zachary had carved himself. Sarah Quinlan, it read. Beloved wife and mother. 1845–1876. Wildflowers had grown up around it and the grass was soft beneath their feet. Wilhelmina stood quietly for a long moment, her hands folded in front of her. "I will try to honor her memory," she said finally. "I will try to be good to her children." "Thank you," Zachary said, his voice rough. "Will you show me where your husband is buried?" he asked. Wilhelmina shook her head. "There is no grave. The tunnel collapse buried him and 5 other men. They tried to dig them out, but it was too dangerous. Eventually they gave up and sealed the tunnel, so he is still there under the mountain." Her voice broke slightly. "I never got to say goodbye." Without thinking, Zachary reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. She stiffened at first, then relaxed slightly, allowing the small comfort. They stood together on the hill, 2 grieving people trying to figure out how to move forward, and for the first time since Sarah died, Zachary felt like maybe, just maybe, he was not completely alone. The first weeks were hard. Wilhelmina threw herself into running the household with almost desperate energy. She cooked and cleaned and did laundry and mended clothes and cared for the children from dawn until well past dark. She set up her sewing equipment in a corner of the main room and took orders from the few neighboring ranches, making shirts and dresses and doing alterations. She was trying to be useful, Zachary realized, trying to prove that Zachary had not made a mistake in bringing her here. But she was also avoiding, he thought. Avoiding sitting still, avoiding thinking, avoiding feeling. He understood because he did the same thing. He worked himself to exhaustion every day, riding fences and tending cattle and breaking horses until his body was too tired to think about Sarah. At night, he collapsed into bed in the small room off the kitchen that he had moved into, giving Wilhelmina the main bedroom upstairs. Sometimes he heard her moving around in the night, footsteps pacing back and forth, and he knew she was having trouble sleeping. He wanted to help but did not know how. They were 2 strangers living in the same house, bound by vows but not by understanding. The children provided a bridge of sorts. They needed attention and discipline and love, and both Zachary and Wilhelmina could focus on that without having to focus on each other. Wilhelmina was patient with their grief, letting them cry when they needed to, listening when they talked about their mother, never trying to pretend she could fill that void. She was especially good with Emma, who was now 9 months old and starting to pull herself up on furniture. The baby clearly sensed that Wilhelmina was not her mother, but she also seemed to understand that this woman was safe and caring. She started reaching for Wilhelmina when she was tired or scared, and Zachary could see how much that meant to his new wife. Thomas remained the biggest challenge. The boy was angry, so angry, and he directed most of that anger at Wilhelmina. He was rude to her, ignored her requests, and made sarcastic comments under his breath. One evening, about a month after they arrived at the ranch, things came to a head. Wilhelmina had asked Thomas to help her carry water from the well, and he had refused, saying he had more important things to do. Wilhelmina, tired and at the end of her patience, had snapped at him. Thomas had snapped back, and suddenly they were both yelling. The younger children had scattered, frightened by the sudden anger, and Zachary had come in from the barn to find his son and his wife facing off in the kitchen. "That is enough," Zachary said firmly. "Thomas, outside. Now." Thomas glared at Wilhelmina one more time, then stomped out. Zachary followed him, leaving Wilhelmina standing in the kitchen looking shaken. He found Thomas behind the barn, kicking at the ground and wiping furiously at his eyes. "I know you are angry," Zachary said quietly. "I know this is hard." "You do not know anything," Thomas shot back. "You replaced Ma like she did not even matter." "I did not replace your mother. No one could replace her." "Then why did you bring her here? Why did you marry some stranger and expect us to just accept it?" "Because I could not do it alone." Zachary's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "I was failing, Thomas. The house was falling apart. The younger children were scared and crying all the time. Margaret was exhausted. You were working yourself to death. Something had to change. We were managing. We were drowning. And I will not apologize for trying to save us." Zachary took a breath, forcing himself to speak more gently. "Wilhelmina is not trying to replace your mother. She is trying to help us. And she is grieving too. She lost her husband. She understands what we are going through." "Then why does she act like everything is fine? Why does she just keep working and pretending like she is not sad?" "Because that is how she is dealing with her grief. The same way I deal with mine. The same way you deal with yours." Zachary put a hand on his son's shoulder. "I need you to try, Thomas. I need you to give her a chance. We are all doing our best, but we have to work together." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded once stiffly. "Fine, I will try." It was not much, but it was a start. That night at dinner, Thomas apologized to Wilhelmina in a mumbled voice. She accepted graciously and offered an apology of her own for losing her temper. The tension in the house eased slightly, though Thomas remained guarded. But he stopped being openly hostile, and that was progress. Autumn came, and with it, the hard work of preparing for winter. Zachary and Thomas butchered hogs and preserved meat. Wilhelmina and Margaret canned vegetables from the garden and made preserves. Daniel helped stack firewood, and even little Samuel did his part by gathering eggs from the chickens. Catherine followed Wilhelmina around, learning to sew and cook and keep house. Emma learned to walk, taking her first tottering steps into Wilhelmina's arms, and the moment was so sweet and so painful that both Zachary and Wilhelmina had to look away from each other, unable to meet the other's eyes. One evening in late October, after the children were all in bed, Zachary came into the main room to find Wilhelmina sitting by the fire, mending one of Daniel's shirts. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, and there was something defeated in her posture that made him pause. "Are you all right?" he asked. Wilhelmina looked up, startled. "I am fine." "You do not look fine." She set down the mending and rubbed her eyes. "It is just hard sometimes. I thought keeping busy would help, but some days the grief catches up with me anyway." Zachary sat down in the chair across from her. "I know what you mean. I will be working on something, and suddenly I will think about Sarah, about how she would laugh at something or how she would handle a situation, and it hits me all over again that she is gone." "James would have loved this place," Wilhelmina said softly. "He always talked about getting out of the mining towns, finding somewhere quiet where we could build a life together. We were going to have children. We had names picked out and everything." Her voice broke. "But then the tunnel collapsed and all those plans died with him." "I am sorry," Zachary said, and he meant it with his whole heart. "I am sorry, too, about Sarah, about all of this." She gestured vaguely at the room, at the life they were living. "I know this is not what either of us wanted. No, but it is what we have, and it is better than being alone." Wilhelmina met his eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition. They were both broken people trying to put the pieces back together, and maybe that was its own kind of bond. "The children are lucky to have you," Zachary said. "You have been so good with them." "They are good children, they make it easy." Wilhelmina paused. "Emma called me Mama yesterday." Zachary's breath caught. How did that make you feel? Guilty, sad, happy, all of it at once. She looked down at her hands. I never thought I would be a mother. James and I tried for 3 years, but it never happened. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me, and now I have 6 children and they are not even mine. They could be, Zachary said quietly. If you want them to be, you are raising them, you are caring for them. That makes you their mother in every way that matters. Wilhelmina's eyes filled with tears, but their real mother would want them to be loved and cared for, and they are. You do that. Zachary leaned forward. You are allowed to love them, Wilhelmina. You are allowed to let them love you. It does not dishonor Sarah's memory. A tear slid down Wilhelmina's cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. Thank you for saying that. They sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. It was the longest conversation they had since getting married, and it felt like a door opening. Not to romance or love, not yet, but to something deeper. Friendship, partnership, the beginning of healing. Winter came hard and fast that year. The first snow fell in early November, and by December the ranch was blanketed in white. The days were short and cold, and the work was relentless. Zachary and Thomas spent hours every day tending to the livestock, making sure they had food and water and shelter. Wilhelmina kept the house warm and the children occupied. They made it through Thanksgiving, and then it was time to face Christmas, the first one without Sarah and James. The children were subdued, clearly remembering the previous year when their mother had been alive. Wilhelmina tried to make it special, baking cookies and stringing popcorn garlands and telling stories by the fire. Zachary rode into town and brought back small gifts for each child. A new doll for Catherine, a pocket knife for Daniel, hair ribbons for Margaret, a book for Thomas, a wooden train for Samuel, and a soft stuffed rabbit for Emma. For Wilhelmina, he bought a bolt of beautiful deep green fabric that she had admired once when they were in town together. When she unwrapped it on Christmas morning, her eyes widened. Zachary, this is too much. It is not enough, he said, for everything you do for us. She looked at him for a long moment, something soft in her expression. Thank you. She had gotten him a gift too, he discovered. A new pair of work gloves that she had sewn herself from soft leather, lined with wool to keep his hands warm. They fit perfectly, and when he put them on, he felt something warm spread through his chest. She had thought about him, had taken the time to make something specifically for him. It was a small thing, but it mattered. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Zachary found Wilhelmina sitting by the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. She was holding something in her hands, and as he got closer, he saw it was the photograph of her late husband. I am trying to let go, she said without looking at him, but I do not know how. Maybe you do not have to let go completely. Maybe you just have to make room for something new alongside the old. Wilhelmina turned to face him. Is that what you are doing, making room? I am trying to. Zachary sat down beside her. Sarah will always be part of me. But I am starting to realize that honoring her memory does not mean I have to live in the past forever. I keep thinking James would be disappointed in me, Wilhelmina admitted. I married another man so soon after he died. I am living on a ranch in Wyoming instead of waiting for him in California. I am mothering children that should have been ours. Or maybe he would be glad that you are not alone, that you found a way to keep going. Wilhelmina considered that, then carefully set the photograph down on the windowsill. Maybe. They sat together in the darkness, shoulders almost touching, and Zachary realized that something had shifted between them. They were not just two strangers bound by a practical arrangement anymore. They were becoming friends, partners, people who understood each other's pain and were learning to help each other heal. The winter was long and harsh, but they made it through. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown grass that would soon turn green. The work shifted from winter survival to spring preparation. Calves were born and had to be watched carefully. Fences needed mending. The garden needed planting. The children helped where they could, and Zachary was amazed at how well they had all adapted. Even Thomas seemed less angry, more resigned to their new life. Margaret smiled more often. The younger children treated Wilhelmina like she had always been there, and Emma was firmly attached to her, calling her Mama without hesitation. One day in late April, Zachary was working on mending a fence when he looked up to see Wilhelmina walking toward him across the pasture. She had Emma on her hip and was carrying a basket. When she reached him, she set Emma down in the grass and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, handing him the bundle. Inside were fresh biscuits and cold meat and an apple. Zachary's stomach growled, reminding him that he had skipped breakfast. "Thank you. You did not have to walk all the way out here." "I wanted to." It is a beautiful day and Emma needed some fresh air. Wilhelmina sat down in the grass, letting Emma crawl around nearby. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you." Zachary felt a flutter of nervousness. "About what? About us? About this arrangement?" Wilhelmina plucked at the grass, not meeting his eyes. "We have been married for 9 months now, and I have been thinking that maybe it is time to stop treating this like a business arrangement and start treating it like a real marriage." Zachary's heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I care about you, Zachary, not just as the father of the children I am raising, but as a person, as a man. And I think maybe you care about me too." "I do," Zachary said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "I have been feeling that way for a while now, but I did not want to push you." Wilhelmina finally looked at him, and he saw vulnerability in her eyes. "I love James. I will always love him, but he is gone and you are here. And I do not want to spend the rest of my life grieving for what I lost instead of appreciating what I have." Zachary set down the food and moved closer to her. "I feel the same way about Sarah. She was my world for so long, but you have become important to me, Wilhelmina. You and the way you care for my children and the way you make the house feel like a home again. I would like this to be a real marriage too. Are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated. I am sure." He reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm from all the work she did. "I am very sure." Wilhelmina squeezed his hand and then, slowly, she leaned toward him. Zachary met her halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tentative and sweet and full of promise. It was not the desperate passion of young love, but something deeper and more lasting. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "So we are doing this for real now?" Wilhelmina asked. "For real," Zachary confirmed. Emma chose that moment to crawl over and pull herself up on Zachary's knee, babbling happily. Zachary scooped her up and held her between them, and Wilhelmina laughed, reaching over to smooth the baby's hair. They sat there together in the spring sunshine, a family slowly becoming whole. The change in their relationship was gradual but profound. Zachary moved back into the main bedroom, and though the first few nights were awkward, they soon found a comfortable rhythm. Wilhelmina would curl against his side at night, and Zachary would hold her, and sometimes they would talk in the darkness about their days or their pasts or their hopes for the future. Other times they would just be quiet, taking comfort in each other's presence. They were learning each other slowly, discovering preferences and quirks and the small intimacies that bound married couples together. The children noticed the change too. Thomas was the first to comment on it, catching Zachary alone in the barn one morning. "You seem happier," he said bluntly. "I am," Zachary admitted. "Wilhelmina and I are trying to make this a real marriage." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then nodded, Good, she is good to us, and you deserve to be happy. Ma would want that. The words were simple, but they meant everything. Zachary pulled his son into a hug, feeling the boy's arms come around him tightly. Thomas had grown so much in the past year, in height and maturity both. He was becoming a fine young man. Margaret cornered Wilhelmina with similar questions. "Are you and Pa in love now?" She asked with the directness of a child. Wilhelmina considered the question carefully. "I think we are learning to love each other. It is different from the love I had with my first husband, but it is still real and good." "I am glad," Margaret said. "You make him smile again." Summer brought long days and hard work, but also joy. The children played in the creek and helped with the garden and learned to ride the gentler horses. Zachary taught Daniel how to rope cattle, and the boy took to it naturally. Catherine spent hours with Wilhelmina, learning to sew more complex patterns. Samuel followed Thomas everywhere, idolizing his older brother. And Emma toddled around the house, getting into everything and charming everyone with her bright smile. In July, Wilhelmina realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one night after they had made love, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I think we are going to have a baby." Zachary felt joy and fear crash over him in equal measure. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I feel the same way I have heard other women describe." "How do you feel about it?" Zachary asked carefully. Wilhelmina was quiet for a moment. "Scared, happy, worried that something will go wrong, but mostly happy. James and I tried for so long, and I thought maybe I could not have children. But now—" She placed his hand over her stomach. "Now we are going to have a baby together." "We are going to have a baby," Zachary repeated, and then he was laughing and pulling her close and kissing her thoroughly. "We are going to have a baby." They told the children at breakfast the next morning. The reactions were mixed. Thomas looked shocked, then pleased. Margaret squealed and immediately started planning what the baby would need. Daniel and Catherine seemed excited but not entirely sure what it meant. Samuel asked if the baby would play with him. Emma, too young to understand, just banged her spoon on the table and demanded more porridge. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Wilhelmina's belly grew round, and she glowed with health and happiness. Zachary found himself constantly amazed by her strength and her kindness, and the way she loved all of them so completely. He had not thought he could love again after Sarah, but his heart had opened despite his fears, and now it was full to bursting. In late October, Wilhelmina went into labor. Zachary rode hard to fetch the nearest woman experienced in midwifery, a rancher's wife named Mrs. Patterson who lived 5 miles away. She arrived quickly and took over the bedroom, shooing Zachary out and telling him to keep the children calm. The next several hours were the longest of Zachary's life. He paced the main room while Margaret tried to keep the younger children occupied. Thomas stood watch by the window, his face pale. Every time they heard Wilhelmina cry out, everyone tensed. Finally, as the sun was setting, they heard a new sound, a baby crying. Zachary's knees nearly buckled with relief. Mrs. Patterson came out a few minutes later, wiping her hands on her apron and smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Quinlan, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Zachary rushed into the bedroom to find Wilhelmina propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a small bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Zachary saw his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face, and he was the most beautiful thing Zachary had ever seen. "Hello, little one," Zachary whispered, touching one tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Zachary felt tears prick his eyes. "Welcome to the family." "What should we name him?" Wilhelmina asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Now, looking at his new son, Zachary knew exactly what felt right. What about James Zachary Quinlan? James after your husband and Zachary to keep the tradition. Wilhelmina's eyes filled with tears. You would do that. Name him after James. He was part of your life. He is part of what made you who you are. I want to honor that. Then James Zachary Quinlan it is, Wilhelmina said, smiling through her tears. The children came in to meet their new brother, all 6 of them crowding carefully around the bed. Emma was fascinated by the tiny baby, reaching out to touch his hair. Samuel announced that the baby was small but okay. Catherine thought he was perfect. Daniel wanted to know when the baby could ride a horse. Margaret cried happy tears and asked if she could help take care of him. And Thomas, reserved Thomas, looked at the baby with something like wonder in his eyes. He is ours, Thomas said. Not just Pa's or Wilhelmina's, but all of ours. Yes, Zachary said, pulling his oldest son against his side. He is all of ours. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Zachary sat in the rocking chair beside the bed, holding baby James while Wilhelmina slept. He looked down at his son, at the miracle of this new life, and thought about how far they had all come. A year and a half ago, he had been drowning in grief and desperation. Wilhelmina had been fading away in a dress shop in California. Now they were here together, with 7 children and a life that felt full and rich and worth living. Your mama is an amazing woman, Zachary whispered to the sleeping baby. And your brothers and sisters are going to love you so much. We all are. The baby made a small sound, and Zachary rocked him gently, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude and hope for the future. The first winter with baby James was chaotic but joyful. The baby was a good sleeper, thankfully, though he had his fussy moments. Wilhelmina nursed him and cared for him with the ease of someone who had already raised 6 children through infancy, though technically Emma was the only one she had cared for as a baby. Margaret was a devoted big sister, constantly wanting to hold James and help with his care. Even the boys took turns rocking him when he was fussy, and Emma was fascinated by the baby, always wanting to pat his head and bring him her toys. Zachary had never been happier. He loved watching Wilhelmina with their son, loved seeing her confidence as a mother bloom fully. He loved the way she had transformed his house into a true home, full of warmth and laughter and love. He loved how she handled the older children with patience and wisdom, setting boundaries but also showing grace when they struggled. Most of all, he loved her, this woman who had come into his life when everything felt broken, and had helped him heal in ways he had not thought possible. One evening in February, after the children were all in bed and baby James was asleep in his cradle, Zachary pulled Wilhelmina onto his lap as they sat by the fire. She laughed and tried to protest, but he held her firmly. "I love you," he said, looking into her eyes. "I need you to know that. I love you with everything I have." Wilhelmina cupped his face in her hands. "I love you too. I did not think I could ever love again after James died, but you have shown me that the heart has room for more than one great love. We have both lost so much, but we found each other. We did. And we built something beautiful together." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for bringing me here and giving me a family and showing me that life could be good again. Thank you for saving us," Zachary said. "For loving my children and building a home with me and giving me a reason to smile again." They held each other close, the fire crackling beside them, and outside the snow fell softly over the Wyoming landscape. Somewhere up on the hill, under the cottonwood tree, Sarah's grave rested peacefully. And somewhere far away in California, under a mountain, James Rosewood's body lay forever entombed. They would not forget their first loves, would not dishonor those memories. But they had learned that grief did not have to be the end of the story. They had learned that healing was possible, that love could grow again even in the hardest soil, that two broken people could come together and make each other whole. The years that followed were good ones. Baby James grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's eyes and his father's determined chin. The older children flourished. Thomas grew into a young man who worked the ranch alongside his father with skill and pride. Margaret became a beautiful, capable young woman who had her mother's gentle way with people. Daniel proved to be the best horseman in the family, with a natural gift for working with the animals. Catherine developed a talent for sewing that rivaled Wilhelmina's, and they spent many happy hours working together on various projects. Samuel grew out of his shyness and became a cheerful, chattering boy who made everyone laugh. And Emma, who had been just a baby when Wilhelmina arrived, grew into a bright, loving girl who called Wilhelmina Mama without any memory of the woman who had given birth to her. 2 years after James was born, Wilhelmina became pregnant again. This time she was calmer, more confident, and the pregnancy was easy. She delivered a daughter in the spring, a tiny girl with wispy blonde hair and her father's smile. They named her Sarah Elizabeth Quinlan, honoring Zachary's first wife and acknowledging the foundation upon which their family had been built. When they took the baby up to the grave under the cottonwood tree, both Zachary and Wilhelmina felt a sense of peace, as if Sarah herself was blessing this new life. The ranch prospered. Zachary's hard work and Thomas's growing skill meant they were able to expand their herd and improve their land. Wilhelmina's sewing business continued, and she became known throughout the territory for her fine work. The children all contributed in their own ways, and the house was always full of activity and noise and life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Wilhelmina to the hill where Sarah was buried. It had become a special place for both of them, a spot where they could look out over the ranch and see everything they had built together. The children were all occupied, the older ones watching the younger ones for a few precious hours of privacy. 5 years, Wilhelmina said, leaning against Zachary's side. It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still cannot believe you agreed to marry me, a stranger with 6 children and a falling-apart ranch. You were a stranger who looked at me and saw someone worth saving. How could I refuse that? We saved each other, Zachary corrected. I would not have made it without you. The children would not have made it, and I would have faded away in that dress shop, drowning in grief and loneliness. Wilhelmina turned to face him. We were meant to find each other, Zachary. I believe that. Even though we both loved other people first, even though we came together out of desperation and practicality, we were meant to be. I believe that too. Zachary kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. You are my home, Wilhelmina. You and the children and this life we have built. I could not ask for anything more. Neither could I. She rested her head against his chest. Do you think Sarah would be happy, seeing how the children turned out, seeing us together? I think she would be grateful that her children are loved and cared for, and I think she would like you. You are both strong women who put family first. I wish I could have known her. In a way, you do know her. She lives on in our children. In Thomas's determination and Margaret's kindness and Daniel's adventurous spirit, you see pieces of her every day. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Wyoming landscape. The mountains turned purple in the distance, and the grass glowed golden. In the valley below, they could see their house, smoke rising from the chimney. Their children were there, safe and warm and loved. Their son James, named for Wilhelmina's first husband, and their daughter Sarah, named for Zachary's first wife. A family built on the foundation of loss but growing strong and beautiful despite it. "We should get back," Wilhelmina said eventually, "before the children burn down the house." Zachary laughed. "They are not that bad. You did not see what happened last time Margaret tried to teach Daniel to cook." They walked down the hill hand in hand, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. Behind them, Sarah's grave rested under the cottonwood tree, and somewhere in California, James's memory was honored in the son who bore his name. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held them captive. They had learned to carry their grief without being crushed by it, had learned to honor their first loves while still building something new and beautiful. As they reached the house, they could hear the children's voices inside, a mixture of laughter and arguing and the everyday sounds of family life. Baby Sarah was crying, probably hungry. James was shouting about something. Emma was singing. It was chaotic and messy and perfect. Zachary paused at the door, pulling Wilhelmina back for one more kiss. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," she replied, her eyes shining. They went inside together, into the warmth and noise and love, into the life they had built from the ashes of their grief. Two people who had lost everything had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found healing. They had found hope. They had found home. Years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and work and family life. Thomas turned 18 and took on even more responsibility with the ranch, talking about maybe starting his own spread someday. Margaret began courting a young man from a neighboring ranch, a good boy who treated her with respect and kindness. Daniel won a ribbon at the county fair for his horsemanship. Catherine made her first quilt, piecing together scraps of fabric with patient skill. Samuel started learning to read, surprising everyone with how quickly he picked it up. Emma grew from a toddler into a little girl with opinions on everything. James became a sturdy little boy who followed his older brothers everywhere. And Sarah, the baby, grew into a happy, laughing child who wrapped everyone around her tiny finger. Wilhelmina and Zachary's love continued to deepen and mature. They had their arguments, their stresses, their difficult moments. Raising 9 children was never easy, but they worked through everything together, always coming back to each other at the end of the day. They had learned to communicate, to support each other's strengths, to shore up each other's weaknesses. They had become true partners in every sense of the word. One night, when they had been married for 7 years, Zachary woke to find Wilhelmina standing at the window, looking out at the starlit landscape. He got up and joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. "I was just thinking about the journey that brought me here. How scared I was when you first walked into my shop, how desperate and lost I felt. And now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. This life, this family, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "I was so angry at God when James died. I thought he had abandoned me, taken away my chance at happiness, but maybe he was just clearing a path for something different, something better. I felt the same way after Sarah died. I could not understand why he would take her from me, from our children. But if she had not died, I never would have found you. We never would have built this family together. Do you think that makes us terrible people, to be grateful for something that came from such tragedy? No. I think it makes us human. We did not cause those tragedies, and we are allowed to find joy and meaning in what came after." Zachary kissed her softly. "We honored our first loves by living well, by building families and raising children and creating love. That is not something to feel guilty about." Wilhelmina smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." He pulled her back toward the bed. "Come on, we both need sleep. James will be up at dawn wanting breakfast." They climbed back into bed, curling together under the quilts. Wilhelmina's head rested on Zachary's chest and his arm was around her shoulders. It was familiar and comfortable and home. "Zachary," Wilhelmina murmured, half asleep already. Thank you for coming to California to find me. Thank you for asking me to marry you. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for loving my children. Thank you for healing us all." He kissed the top of her head. "We are better together than we ever could have been apart." "Yes," Wilhelmina agreed. "We are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their sleeping children. Outside, the Wyoming night was vast and star-filled. The wind whispered through the grass. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging. And in a house on a ranch in the middle of it all, a family slept peacefully. A family built on loss but sustained by love. A family that proved healing was possible, that second chances existed, that broken hearts could be made whole again. A man who had grieved his wife with 6 children to raise. A woman who had grieved her husband with none. And together, against all odds, they had found not just survival but joy. Not just existence but abundant life. The years ahead would bring more challenges and more blessings. Children would grow up and leave home. New grandchildren would be born. The ranch would continue to thrive and expand. Zachary and Wilhelmina would grow old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering with age, but their love only deepening with time. They would sit together on the porch in their later years, watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard, and they would marvel at the life they had built from such difficult beginnings. They would visit Sarah's grave regularly, bringing flowers in the summer and evergreen boughs in the winter. They would tell their children stories about her, keeping her memory alive. And they would speak of James too, of the husband Wilhelmina had loved first, making sure their son who bore his name knew the man he was named after. They would honor their pasts while living fully in their present. And on quiet evenings, when it was just the two of them, Zachary would take Wilhelmina's hand and tell her he loved her. And she would smile, that beautiful smile that had taken so long to return after James's death, and she would tell him she loved him too. And they would be grateful, so grateful, for the mysterious paths that had brought them together. For the merchant who had mentioned a widow in Eureka. For Zachary's courage in traveling across half the country to meet a stranger. For Wilhelmina's bravery in saying yes to an impossible situation. For the children who needed them both. For the healing that had happened slowly, painfully, beautifully. But tonight, on this peaceful night 7 years into their marriage, they simply slept. Two people who had found each other in grief and built a life in joy. Two broken hearts that had healed together, piece by piece, day by day, until they were whole again. Not unchanged by their losses, those scars would always remain, but transformed by them, made deeper and more compassionate and more grateful for every moment of love and life. The house settled around them, the wood creaking gently. In the next room, baby Sarah made small sleeping sounds. Down the hall, James rolled over in his bed, clutching his favorite blanket. Emma's soft breathing mixed with Catherine's. Samuel snored slightly. Daniel muttered something in his sleep. Margaret's room was quiet. Thomas's was too. All of them safe. All of them loved. All of them part of this family that had been broken and remade into something new. And in the master bedroom, Zachary and Wilhelmina slept on, their bodies curved together, their hearts beating in tandem. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. There would be breakfast to make and chores to do and children to care for and a ranch to run. There would be laughter and tears and all the messy, beautiful chaos of family life. But for now, there was just peace, just love. Just the profound contentment of two people who had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged on the other side together. Two people who had learned that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that healing is possible, that love can bloom again even in the most barren soil, that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest circumstances. He had grieved his wife with 6 kids to raise. She had grieved her husband with none. And they had healed each other whole, building a family and a life that honored their pasts while embracing their future. Together, they had proven that even the deepest wounds can close, that even the darkest nights give way to dawn, that even the most broken hearts can love again. And in that truth, in that hard-won healing, they found not just survival but abundant, overflowing, beautiful life.